You know, usually when we talk about putting on armor or like defending ourselves, there's this expectation of something physical.
Right, like a Kevlar vest or something.
Yeah, exactly. You put on a Kevlar vest, the bullets bounce off, and it's just physics. You are protected.
It's straightforward.
It is. But then you step into the world of human relationships, like
Mhm.
into toxic workplaces or manipulative friendships or gaslighting partners, and suddenly that physical armor is entirely useless.
Yeah, it doesn't help you at all in a boardroom.
Exactly. You need a completely different kind of shield. Because navigating a toxic environment, it isn't like walking onto a battlefield. It's like trying to navigate a maze where the walls keep shifting every single time you turn your back.
Right, you can't rely on a static map.
No, you can't rely on your memory at all. You need a live, active operating system to guide you out. And so today, for you listening, we are looking at the architectural blueprints for building exactly that. It's honestly a phenomenal internal document titled Architecting the Shield, a strategic media blueprint.
Yeah, and this isn't just some standard review, right? We are looking at a real showrunner-level analysis of a proposed media property.
Which is wild to get our hands on.
It really is.
Hmm.
It functions as a hybrid of, well, urban culture, psychological therapy, and tactical self-preservation. This document breaks down the mechanics of a show that's designed to do way more than just entertain you.
It's essentially reverse engineering how to get a person out of a damaging psychological dynamic.
Precisely.
So our mission for this deep dive today is to really pull this blueprint apart. We're going to explore how it constructs that survival mechanism and analyze the unique chemistry of its three main voices.
Because the voices are the core of it all.
They really are. And we also want to uncover the behavioral science that turns a traumatized, passive listener into an active, protected community member. Let's look at this through the lens of a new listener dropping in for the very first time.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
The blueprint centers entirely on the dynamic of three hosts, right?
Yeah.
Keisha, Maya, and Zora.
Hmm.
Why these three specific archetypes? Like, what's the logic there?
Well, because surviving a toxic environment actually requires three distinct cognitive steps. You need validation, comprehension, and execution.
Okay.
And if you miss even one of those steps, the listener just stays trapped. So Keisha, she represents the validation step. The blueprint calls her the anchor of street reality and lived experience.
Which is so crucial.
It is. She brings the emotional truth. Because when someone is in a toxic relationship, their reality is constantly being denied.
Oh, constantly. The gaslighting alone.
Right. So Keisha is the voice saying, no, I know what that exhaustion feels like. I know what it's like to just walk on eggshells all day. She prevents the show from drifting into, sterile academic theory.
Which, I mean, that's vital. Abstract theory doesn't help you when your nervous system is just completely hijacked because, I don't know, your boss just publicly humiliated you.
Exactly. You can't process theory in that state.
But validation alone just leaves you venting. You feel heard, but you're still stuck. Which brings us to Maya. The blueprint calls her the psychology translator.
Yes, the bridge.
Right. She bridges the gap between Keisha's raw experience and the clinical mechanics of, like, why it's actually happening.
Yeah, and we can look at how she translates a concept like avoidant attachment. Like, a textbook would say an avoidant person has a dismissive view of intimacy.
Which is so dry.
It's super dry. But Maya translates that by explaining the underlying mechanism. She tells the listener that for this person, their nervous system literally perceives emotional closeness as a survival threat.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they aren't pulling away because you aren't good enough. They're pulling away because intimacy is triggering their internal alarm system. By explaining the why, Maya removes the listener's self-blame.
So Keisha validates the pain, Maya decodes the psychology, and then Zora steps in.
Right, the tactician.
Exactly. Zora is the tactical strategist. She is the systems thinker, focused entirely on business, boundaries, and execution. So while Keisha says, this hurts, and Maya says, here is why it hurts.
Zora is the one looking at her watch.
Yes. She's saying, okay, here are the three unshakable boundaries you are setting by 5:00 p.m. today, and here is the exact script you are going to use.
Because Zora represents the transition from understanding to action. I mean, without her, it's just a therapy session. With her, it becomes a tactical extraction.
I honestly couldn't help but view this dynamic like a heist movie crew.
I like that.
Right. Like in a good heist movie, you never just have three generic thieves. You have highly specialized roles.
Right. You need the demo guy, the driver.
Exactly. You have the inside person who knows the emotional layout of the target. That's Keisha. You have the hacker who understands and overrides the complex security systems. That's Maya. And you have the mastermind who maps out the extraction plan, which is Zora.
That's a perfect analogy. Here, instead of robbing a casino, they are cracking the code of a hostile emotional environment. Keisha maps it, Maya hacks it, and Zora executes it.
And because of that, that highly specialized division of labor,
Yeah.
they can guide the listener through a really specific psychological sequence in every single episode.
Yeah, the episodic structure is very deliberate. It goes problem, then diagnosis, then tactical tool, and finally exit path.
Define the toxic behavior, score it, protect yourself, and leave.
Exactly. And what glues this entire progression together is the vocabulary they use. The blueprint highlights these incredibly sticky terms, things like the shield, pattern loop, illusion of potential, and my personal favorite, clarity over chemistry.
Let's actually talk about clarity over chemistry, because if you were listening right now, think about how many times you have compromised your own boundaries simply because you felt a spark or you had great chemistry with someone.
Everyone has done it.
Right. You ignore the glaring disrespect because the banter is just so good. Clarity over chemistry forces a cognitive override. It demands you look at the data of how they treat you, rather than the dopamine rush of how they make you feel.
Well, and supplying these phrases, it isn't just about creating catchy slogans for merch. It's an application of linguistic determinism.
Okay, unpack that a little for us.
Sure, it's the idea that the language we use actively shapes our perception of reality. By giving the listener a distinct term like hope cycle, you give them a heuristic, a mental shortcut.
So they don't get lost in the weeds.
Exactly. They no longer have to spend an hour agonizing over why their partner is acting out again. They can simply identify, oh, I am currently in the hope cycle, which immediately distances them from the emotion and allows them to observe the behavior objectively.
So we have these highly specialized hosts, a powerful psychological sequence, and this really potent vocabulary. But none of that matters if the listener tunes out before the tactical advice is even given.
Right. Retention is everything.
Which leads into a really fascinating debate in the document about format and retention. Even the best content fails if the packaging is just too dense.
Yeah, and the blueprint delivers a pretty harsh critique of the original pilot's length. The debut episode was 55 minutes long.
That's a hefty debut.
It is. And the strategic analysis argues that this is fundamentally broken for a new audience. They propose stripping it down to a highly optimized 38 minutes.
Wow, okay. How does that break down?
Specifically, it's a 2-minute intro followed by content blocks of 8 minutes, 10 minutes, 8 minutes, and 8 minutes, capped with a 2-minute outro, totaling exactly 38 minutes.
I have to admit, I bristled when I read this section.
Really? Why?
Well, I have a real problem with the idea of taking a 55-minute exploration of complex psychological abuse and chopping it up just to appease, like, a TikTok-brained algorithm.
Yeah.
Don't we risk watering down the nuance for the listener when we compress trauma discussions to hit an arbitrary 38-minute metric?
It's a natural concern, but the blueprint's reasoning isn't actually about appeasing an algorithm. No, it's grounded in the cognitive load of the listener. When a listener is absorbing content about abuse, manipulation, or workplace toxicity, their nervous system is processing heavy emotional mirroring.
Because they're relating it to their own trauma.
Exactly. 55 minutes of relentless psychological deep diving leads to cognitive fatigue. The listener just zones out as a defense mechanism.
So you're saying the shorter runtime is actually an act of psychological pacing?
Precisely. That 8-10-8-8 structure mimics natural human attention cycles. It takes about 8 to 10 minutes to introduce a heavy concept like defining a manipulation tactic before the brain desperately needs a pivot or a reset.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
Right. By breaking the episode into these specific chunks, moving from Keisha's story to Maya's analysis to Zora's strategy, the show constantly resets the listener's attention span. Brevity forces clarity.
Every sentence has to serve the listener's immediate survival. There's no room for meandering rants.
Exactly. But even with perfect pacing, you still need an initial emotional hook to get them invested in those 38 minutes.
And the blueprint solves that by proposing anchoring each episode with an anonymous listener story. They call it the shield story of the week.
It's simply the most effective way to establish emotional proof. The blueprint provides a really specific example to illustrate this. A listener from Atlanta writes in saying their partner disappeared for 3 days with zero communication, only to return and immediately start love bombing them.
Let's actually pause there and define love bombing for anyone unfamiliar. Because it's not just, someone buying you excessive flowers or being super affectionate.
No, not at all.
It's much more mechanical than that.
Love bombing is a systematic, overwhelming display of affection, attention, and grand gestures that's designed to rapidly dismantle a person's boundaries and secure compliance.
It's a manipulation tactic.
Completely. It floods the victim's brain with dopamine, creating an artificial sense of profound intimacy. In this Atlanta story, the partner vanishes, which creates extreme anxiety and a deficit of security, and then returns with this flood of dopamine.
Which creates a trauma bond.
Exactly.
And by anchoring the episode with that specific, raw story, the show achieves immediate identification. You hear that and you think, oh my God, my ex pulled that exact same disappearing act.
Yes, it pulls you right in.
But instead of just sympathizing, the show deploys the hosts. Right. Keisha relates to the anxiety of the silent treatment. Maya breaks down the dopamine deprivation cycle of the trauma bond. And Zora hands the Atlanta listener a script for setting a hard boundary.
And by decoding a real, concise story, it fosters active community participation. It trains the broader audience to analyze their own lives and submit their own stories.
It creates a self-sustaining content engine.
It does. However, soliciting real trauma stories introduces a massive vulnerability that the blueprint flags with extremely high priority.
The legal and clinical liability.
Yes. The danger of maintaining authority without crossing into medical exposure.
Right, because there is a razor-thin line between giving sharp, tactical life advice and accidentally practicing unlicensed therapy over the internet. When you're dealing with vulnerable people in volatile situations, the wrong advice isn't just bad content, it's actively dangerous.
The blueprint is intensely focused on refining the show's language to mitigate this risk. It highlights the inherent danger of definitive diagnostic statements.
Give me an example of that.
Sure. In an early iteration of the show, a host might look at a listener's situation and declare, if your score is below 25, you are in a high-risk situation.
Which sounds incredibly diagnostic. It sounds like a physician handing over a lab result.
Exactly. It creates an expectation of clinical authority. So the blueprint insists on a linguistic pivot. Instead of a definitive label, you use contextual signaling. The host should say, a score below 25 may signal a high-risk dynamic worth examining.
A signal. Wow, it's such a small adjustment, but it completely removes the medical liability while preserving the tactical urgency.
Right.
You are pointing out the smoke, not diagnosing the fire.
They apply the same rigor to behavioral advice, too, specifically cautioning against overpromising results. The blueprint uses the gray rock method as a prime example of this danger.
Okay, gray rock being the technique where you become as unresponsive, uninteresting, and emotionally flat as a literal gray rock, right?
Yeah.
The goal is to give the manipulative person nothing to feed on, so they eventually get bored and leave you alone.
That is the theory. And the original script apparently promised the listener, if you use gray rock, the toxic behavior eventually stops.
Oh, you can't promise that.
No. The blueprint warns heavily against making that definitive promise, because gray rock does not universally stop manipulation. In fact, if you cut off a toxic person's emotional supply, they often initiate what's called an extinction burst.
Right, an extinction burst. Let's unpack that, because that sounds like a critical mechanism for people to understand.
It is. In behavioral psychology, an extinction burst is a temporary, intense escalation of a behavior when the expected reward is suddenly removed.
Okay, so like what?
Think of a vending machine. If you put your money in and press the button, you expect a candy bar. If the candy bar doesn't drop, you don't just politely walk away.
Right, you press the button harder.
You hit the glass, you rock the machine.
You escalate your behavior because the system that used to work is suddenly failing.
Exactly. When you go gray rock, the manipulator is no longer getting their emotional candy bar. So they hit the glass, they escalate the provocations, hoping to force your old reaction.
Oh, wow. So if a host promises that gray rock makes the behavior stop and the listener experiences an extinction burst, the listener assumes they did something wrong. Or worse, they are put in unforeseen danger because the person escalated.
That vending machine analogy perfectly illustrates the mechanical nature of this. So the blueprint demands safer phrasing, something like, in some situations, reducing your emotional reactions can reduce their attention-seeking behavior.
It manages expectations.
And they also mandate a very clear disclaimer at the top of the show, basically stating, this podcast is for education, awareness, and self-reflection, not a replacement for clinical therapy, diagnosis, or legal advice.
Which protects both the brand and the listener. It's essential. So once that liability safety net is secured, the blueprint then outlines how to inject high-energy, recurring segments to keep the retention high while safely applying these theories.
Yes, and I love these proposed segments. They act as pressure release valves for the heavier content.
Oh, totally. One is called toxic or nah, where the hosts debate a rapid-fire scenario. For instance, your partner disappears for 3 days and then says they just got overwhelmed by work. Toxic or nah?
And you immediately see the host archetypes clash in the best way possible. Keisha hears that and says, toxic, period. You don't leave people hanging.
Right. And Maya might look deeper and say, well, let's look at the pattern. Are they truly overwhelmed, or is this an intentional withdrawal to create anxiety?
And Zora overrides both of them by saying, the why doesn't matter right now. I'm looking for accountability metrics. What is their plan to ensure this never happens again?
It's a microcosm of the entire show's philosophy in 3 minutes. They also propose a segment called red flag or green flag, which is designed specifically for social media virality.
Short, punchy clips.
Exactly. Someone submits a statement like, I hate drama, but every single one of my exes is crazy. And all 3 hosts simultaneously yell, red flag.
It creates highly shareable, bite-sized tactical wisdom. And finally, the shield move of the week, which delivers one single, memorable tactical move. A prime example in the document is, stop explaining boundaries twice.
That is profound. Stop explaining boundaries twice. Let's look at the psychology of that. When you explain a boundary the first time, you are setting a standard. When you explain it a second time to someone who violated it, you have unknowingly entered a negotiation. You are expending your energy, trying to convince them to respect you, which is exactly the energy drain they're trying to provoke. You state it once. After that, you enforce it.
It's a perfect distillation of Zora's tactical approach. But you know, the blueprint doesn't stop at broadcast media. The deep dive moves into its most significant revelation.
The red flag index ecosystem.
Yes. How to transform this entire methodology from a passive listening experience into an active, measurable daily habit using the red flag index.
This is where the media property stops being just a show and becomes a comprehensive defensive ecosystem. It's essentially a commercial and content funnel designed to pull the listener out of cognitive dissonance through hard data.
Right. It starts with Tier 1, free engagement, take the red flag index quiz.
And this is a free, heavily structured assessment where the listener answers situational questions to score their current relationship or workplace environment.
And the scores are segmented into clear, objective categories. 0 to 25 is classified as high risk. 26 to 50 is an unstable dynamic. 51 to 75 is recoverable but fragile. And 76 to 100 is the healthy growth zone.
The brilliance here is the behavioral science of quantification. When you are in a toxic environment, your brain lies to you.
It constantly justifies things.
Right. You tell yourself, it's not that bad, or they were just stressed today. Your emotional pain is completely subjective and easy to dismiss. But when you take a quiz and it hands you a literal number, a 22 out of 100, stamped high risk, it turns subjective pain into objective data.
You can't easily argue with the math. It forces reality upon the user. But a score alone just causes anxiety. So the funnel immediately directs them to Tier 2, the workbook.
Which is a 30-day pattern recognition challenge. The prompts in this workbook are specifically designed to dismantle the user's internal justifications. Look at day 1. What behavior keeps repeating? Not what did they say, but what is the physical pattern?
And day 7, what excuses am I making for their behavior?
And then day 16, which is just a psychological gut punch.
Yeah.
Am I loving reality or am I loving potential?
Oh, that day 16 prompt is the ultimate tool for breaking cognitive dissonance. Toxic dynamics thrive on the illusion of potential, the belief that if you just love them enough or work hard enough, the person they were in the first 2 weeks will permanently return.
Which they won't.
No. Forcing the user to write down the stark difference between the reality of Tuesday morning and the fantasy of someday breaks the spell.
And if a listener gets through that workbook and realizes they lack the tools to actually implement the changes, the funnel presents Tier 3, the Shield Academy.
The Academy is the premium level. It consists of rigorous, in-depth modules covering advanced tactical needs like boundary defense, manipulation detection, strategies for workplace toxicity, dating recovery, and finally, nervous system reset.
Which brings Maya's clinical insight back in to help heal the physical toll of trauma. Looking at this entire architecture, the red flag index quiz, the daily workbook, the targeted academy modules, it mirrors the structure of a high-end fitness app.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
But instead of tracking your calories or monitoring your steps, it is tracking your emotional safety. It is measuring your boundary reinforcement.
Hmm.
It basically takes abstract therapeutic concepts that are usually incredibly hard to pin down and turns them into daily measurable habits.
Which is exactly why the strategic blueprint scores this project so aggressively high. In the final evaluation, the architect gives the voice chemistry of Keisha, Maya, and Zora a 9 out of 10. The optimized 38-minute structure gets an 8.5.
Nice.
The brandability of the vocabulary is rated a massive 9.5 out of 10. The virality potential of the segments gets a 9. The only low mark was a 6 out of 10 for initial legal safety, which, as the document outlines, is entirely mitigated with those may signal language tweaks and disclaimers we talked about.
So overall, the blueprint awards this pilot concept an impressive 8.8 out of 10 overall, which is huge. It works phenomenally well because of its positioning. It completely abandons the standard, passive, let's sit and explore your feelings therapy format.
Right. It positions itself as a tactical, defensive operating system for surviving toxic environments.
It gives you the invisible armor we talked about at the very start of this deep dive. It takes the unseen, gaslighting threats of manipulation and toxicity, and through Maya's clinical hacking and Zora's tactical strategies, makes those threats visible, measurable, and ultimately defeatable.
It turns the shifting walls of that maze into a brilliantly mapped-out grid.
Which brings us right back to you, listening to this right now. You can take this exact framework, the validator, the translator, and the strategist, and apply it to how you evaluate your own daily interactions and media consumption. When someone crosses a line with you today, don't just feel the sting like Keisha.
Right. Analyze the mechanism of why they did it like Maya.
And then execute a boundary like Zora, which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to carry into your week. Look closely at your own relationships in your workplace right now. If you were forced to apply the red flag index to your own professional or personal life today, what is one specific illusion of potential you are currently secretly holding on to?
Oof.
And what actionable step will it take for you to finally choose clarity over chemistry today?